know any. Right, so there's a live blue crab as you come in, as you came in. You're welcome to go check that guy out. And then if you're a little timid about the live ones, I've got this little squishy one from the Virginia Institute of Marine Science, which is where, you know, it's sort of like the main of blue crabs, right? So I think we should all be learning how to use this, because in the future, there may be a fishery in your site for Great Bay. But then again, don't quote me on that, because I'm not really sure how this is all gonna play out. So the purpose of doing the talk today for you all is to just sort of give you some framework for how, blue crabs came around in Great Bay and in Wells. I'm really gonna tie in the Wells story, because we've got a couple of years on Chris and his team for monitoring. And we're doing a lot of cross-pollination with our work. So sort of what holds in one place is gonna hold in the other. And so, and if you have a burning question, feel free to just shout it out or raise your hand. I don't necessarily have to wait till the end to do that. Okay, so I have a feeling this is a pretty intelligent crowd. But I'm not intelligent enough to move the slides. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So I think most of you already know this, but I put this up anyway, just as context. So Wells Reserve and Great Bay Reserve near are 2 of 30 other national estuarine research reserves. If you already knew that, great. If you've been to some of these other ones, fantastic. I have a little list. I'm trying to check them all off, you know, and try to go to every single one of them at least once. But the Northeast ones, we've got Wells, Great Bay, Wacoit Bay, Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island, and the one that's actually new is Connecticut. So if you're down in Connecticut, it's a beautiful new reserve. It's at near the mouth of the Connecticut River and Long Island Sound. So it's just a completely different ecosystem. So this is the reserve that I work at. This is Wells. For those of you who are familiar, that's Lawn Home Farm Beach and a back barrier marsh, barrier beach system. And then behind that is the Little River Estuary. So that's one of the estuaries we work in, we do research. And then this aerial view kind of shows you, let me see how I do with this pointer. There we go. There's our campus right there. And for perspective, that is Mount Agamenticus in York. So this is the Webhanet estuary, and this is in the foreground here is the Little River Estuary. And the Little River Estuary is very small. Rachel Carson National Wildlife Refuge is adjacent to it, if you've ever been there. And then the Webhanet is a much larger system that's divided into about 11 different distinct marsh sort of parcels. So it's a big area. I still don't think it's as big as Great Bay. You guys have a lot of real estate, and I'm always jealous. I did work in Great Bay. I should add that I was a research fellow for the NEAR system back in 2012. So that's, I was doing a lot of lobster work, and I'll talk about green crabs and blue crabs as well, because they're all tied in together. Okay, speaking of tying in, what I want to do is just sort of put in context where we are, right? Wells and Great Bay, and we have a lot of love for each other. We are actually the 2 closest reserves in the system in terms of geographic proximity, but our marshes and our coastal ecosystems are very different. But we're both, nonetheless, we are both tied into this greater component called the Gulf of Maine. The Gulf of Maine has its own distinct current system, and it's got 7 or 10 different major rivers from the Merrimack all the way up to down East Maine. So a very, very large system with lots of estuarine input and lots of fresh water, lots of currents. But, and I know you all know this, the Gulf of Maine is experiencing some pretty dramatic warming in and around both deep water and coastal waters. I could do a whole talk and just show you graphs and plots about that. How many here already know this fact, right? Okay, so it's just one way of expressing that visually. So here's your month, here's your year, and this is the warmer colors are bigger temperature anomalies. An anomaly means different from normal, so warmer than normal in this case. These black lines are what we call marine heat waves. So these are periods of time where the temperatures have just kind of gone through the roof for weeks or even months. The one that I really want to point out to you is 2012. If you remember 2012, that was one of the first major heat waves in the Gulf of Maine, and it persisted almost the entire year. And it was very dramatic. It almost closed down the lobster fishery in Maine. And people really were getting upset about this. Subsequent to that, though, we thought, well, maybe that's just a blip, and that's not going to happen again. But look what's happened, right? You have clusters of heat waves, clusters of anomalies, all the way up until 2020, into even last year. So this is not a fear factor thing. This is we are experiencing elevated increased temperatures in the Gulf of Maine. Those impacts permeate into our estuaries, our salt marshes, our bays, all of those things. One type of result has been a lot of green crabs. Okay, now I know you came for a blue crab talk. So this is one of the only slides I'm showing you, but I think it's one of my favorite graphs we've ever done. So we did a study a number of years ago. We trapped green crabs throughout coastal Maine, mid-coast Maine, and closer to down east Maine, but mostly just mid-coast and Wells in southern Maine. And Wells had the most. Yay, we had the most green crabs of anybody else. That's not an award that I'm really proud of. So green crabs have been around for like 200 years, right? They're an invasive species, yet they have proliferated and exploded in numbers, in part because of those warmer temperatures, in part because of other factors. So the question is, what about this one, right? So what can we say about blue crabs? Why are they here? And is it because of the same reason that green crabs have done so well? The answer is we don't really know yet. We don't really have an idea because we don't have a lot of data. We don't have a huge number of studies. That's changing now, and we'll get into that, but it's something that we're really interested in learning more about, both at Wells and Great Bay. So the beautiful swimmer, right? Calanectes sapidus. It's a beautiful name. It literally means in Latin, beautiful swimmer and savory. And I don't usually recommend books to people because I don't know what everybody likes, but there's a book called The Beautiful Swimmer by William Warner, I think. And what's that, Warner? Yeah, yep. And it's an excellent book about blue crab natural history, the fishery in Chesapeake Bay. It's sort of like an equivalent to a lobster book you would read, like the Lobster Gangs of Maine or the Secret Life of Lobsters, right, by Trevor Corson. So blue crab is this sort of new kid on the block. We know a lot about blue crabs. We've got lots of biology that we know about. So I literally just pulled these facts from the NOAA fisheries site. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but they really are very crab-like. They are true crabs. They're swimming crabs. So actually, let me back up a minute. One of the coolest things about them is these flippers in the back. They're basically like rudders, and they use those to get up into the water, and they can swim like a fish. Right? I know you guys are thinking, why do crabs can swim? They can swim. They don't just walk around. So we call these portunid crabs. They're a special group of crabs that are adapted for swimming. It's really freaky to see them swimming. I saw one in Florida once. Really was disturbing, but it was cool too. There's a lot of disturbing things in Florida, but so
lifespan, when they mature, all these things. You look at this list, and when I was putting this list together the other day, I thought, well, does that hold true for a place like Great Bay? Would they mature in 12 to 18 months? I don't know. Seems like it would be different, got different water temperature than the mid-Atlantic states, right? What do they eat? It seems like they eat everything, including other crabs. Do they eat lobster? Very obvious question, as somebody who lives in Maine and works with lobster, very alarming, or maybe not, maybe lobsters eat them. Reproduction, lots of eggs. So they have very crab-like features. Green crabs are similar to this. Our native Jonah or rock crabs have similar characteristics, except for maturity and size and things like that, but these can get big. Okay, what about where we catch blue crabs? And this is not around here, okay? Because remember, we're just talking about where they're found in their native range. So the biggest landings of blue crabs are typically south of the state of Delaware. So, and I think most of you probably know that. If you go to Virginia, the Carolinas, Maryland, that's what they're known for, is blue crab, right? Soft shell blue crab. That's a really big deal. I've had very heated arguments with people about what tastes better, blue crab or lobster. And, you can discuss that all day long. What's really interesting here is I pulled another plot from a grad student, Tanya Rogers at Northeastern University. And you can see in some of the mid-Atlantic states, there's been a negative catch in the last 35 years. So catch rates of blue crabs have decreased, whereas in Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, catches have increased. So it sort of gets you thinking about, are these crabs moving further north? Is that why the catch rates are increasing? Or is it that they're just doing better? The ones that are there are just doing better. They're reproducing more often. Their larvae are surviving longer. Again, I don't know the answer to that. I just think it's an interesting pattern. The other interesting pattern here is just giving you a little background, little blue crab biology 101, is where they're distributed. So their native range is mostly North America and the east coast of South America, as well as the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean. These are native range blue crabs. It's the same species, Calanectes sapidus. So if you go to Florida, or you go to Mexico, or you go to Uruguay, you're seeing the same crab. That's a native range. You can see there's some dots way up here. That's like Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, places like that. So I'm gonna tell you in a minute, there are reports of blue crabs historically in areas like that. So just think about the temperature difference between maritime Canada and someplace like Brazil. Really big, wide latitudinal gradient. The other interesting thing that I want to point out are these red, pink, and sort of lavender. I don't know what I would call that color. These three colors right there. Those are areas that blue crabs have invaded. So I'm working with a colleague now from Sicily, and they're finding blue crabs in salt ponds, salt impoundments where they're harvesting salt in Sicily. And these salt ponds then get abandoned, and the blue crabs take up refuge there. They have no predators. They're basically like pigs in mud, right? They're just enjoying life and growing and getting really big. So Europe has had blue crabs for a while, but only infrequently. And the Mediterranean is way worse than the Gulf of Maine in terms of the rates of species invasion. So it's a very interesting situation. There's also this one dot in Western Australia and one here in Western Africa. So blue crabs are able to find their way around. There are reports of blue crabs in Maine going back to 1960 and even further back, 1920s, and even in the late 1800s. People were seeing blue crabs in places like Booth Bay Harbor, maritime Canada, places like that. There was a paper that came out, this report that came out by David Johnson from VIMS in 2015, where he was showing, this is the historical range. So right at the edge of Cape Cod, that's sort of like the break zone for blue crabs. They don't really like to go north of Cape Cod too much. In other words, it's unusual to find blue crabs frequently, in places like this, but these blue dots are sightings from 2012 to 2014. So again, that suggests, doesn't necessarily mean that it's holding true every year, but it suggests that there's a range expansion, right? And that's the difference between marine invasion and an expansion. An expansion happens slowly because of some type of condition that's changing. And like I already said, blue crab populations in Chesapeake Bay have really been on the decline. They peaked in the 90s, over 800 million blue crabs. That's a lot of blue crabs, and they're down to about, less than half of that. So again, we just don't know why. This is the life cycle of a blue crab, and I'm not going to get into it, just in the interest of time, only to say it's really complicated and it has a lot of different pieces to it. And in order for us to say with some confidence that blue crabs are here to stay, right, in New England or Great Bay or Wells, you really need to show that you've got all these different components of their life cycle. Because if you don't, then you don't have a self-sustaining population. You just have something that might be coming through. These, you've got juveniles and adults, they're growing in the summer. They hibernate in the winter. I'll get into that in a minute because we have a very cool side story about that. When they mate and the females extrude eggs under their abdomen, they migrate out into deeper waters. So they leave the estuary and they go into deeper waters. They hatch their larvae into these little things. They're called zoea. They look like little mosquitoes and they're floating around like plankton. And then they metamorphose into this megalopes, or this final larval stage. And this megalopes does something really cool. It has basically like this super intense robotic spacecraft, and it knows how to find the estuary and go swim right back up into those shallow areas and settle. And it uses the incoming tides to do that. So very complex. These are minimum temperatures for each of these stages. And so if you look at this one here, hibernation, 0 to 3 degrees, they can survive. Well, our water is 0 to 3. Usually it's a little colder than that though, right? Usually, at least this is in Celsius, by the way. So, 0 degrees, 32, but there's some years where our water gets down -1, -2 degrees, but we just haven't seen that lately. There's a clue, right? So if you're not pressuring these crabs with colder water, then they may have a chance to overwinter. So it's just something to think about. So one of the things that we're trying to do, and Great Bay is trying to do, and we're working together on this, we're trying to verify that we have all these stages present in our respective estuarine systems. But do we have larvae? Do we have larvae in Great Bay? Don't know. Do we have temporal trends? Do we have persistence of blue crabs every year, or are they kind of come and go? What do we see for growth? Do we see them molting? Do we see evidence of reproduction? Do we see egg-bearing females? And do we see mating pairs and larvae and all that stuff? You have to be able to connect those dots in order to confidently say, hey, I think there's a persistent population of blue crabs, okay? So what about the impacts? Let's just say blue crabs are here to stay and they're gonna persist, and we're gonna just have this new species that we're gonna have to eventually manage and maybe monitor and do some cool research on. Well, they really taste good. So unlike green crabs, you don't have to try to sell that to people. Most people know that blue crabs command a very high market value. They taste really good. And so there's already that established. The other cool thing about blue crabs, and this is the only other green crab slide I have, so don't worry, is there's evidence that blue crabs eat green crabs. And so we're testing that now in the lab. And if that is true, then blue crabs may be a plus to the green crab population. But we don't know that definitively. It's just a guess. Blue crabs are voracious predators. They eat lots of different shellfish. So this is maybe not a plus because we're not sure how our other shellfish species like clams and oysters are going to fare with blue crabs. And then finally, to me, one of the biggest ones, because it's the biggest, most important single fishery in North America, is American lobster, right? American lobster is $1 billion industry just in Maine. So if lobsters, we've got other issues with lobster that I'm not going to comment on, but I'm only commenting on the blue crab issue, and it's a giant question mark. We just don't know. Why don't we know? Well, we do know a lot about lobsters in Great Bay, and Josh Carloni from New Hampshire Fish and Game, I believe, already gave a talk about that. So this is my only lobster slide, just to say that we've got a lot of publications. We've done a lot of research in Great Bay. We know that lobsters reproduce in Great Bay. We put little backpacks and temperature loggers on them. We know they move around Great Bay and Little Bay. We've done movement studies. We've done larval studies. So Great Bay is a really cool place for lobsters because it's just very unique, and there's a population of lobsters in Great Bay. So we don't know how that will change. We also know that, and I know very little about oysters, but what I do know is I think there's at least a dozen commercial oyster farms in Great Bay. I might have that number a little off, but it's a very lucrative industry here. And there's also restoration efforts going on through the Nature Conservancy and other organizations. But really the big question is, how would blue crabs influence the oyster industry in Great Bay? Of course, there's oysters in Chesapeake Bay too, and they seem to do okay. That's because oysters have the ability to adapt to predators like blue crabs. So they'll actually grow thicker shells, and they can sense blue crabs around them and they will adapt, but that takes time. So if you just all of a sudden have blue crabs jumping all over the oysters, they may not have time to adapt appropriately. So there's another giant question mark there. And Ray Grizzle would be the person to ask about that. We have evidence for blue crabs in Great Bay. These are blue crabs that I caught as a research fellow in Great Bay in 2012. We were out fishing lobsters and green crabs, and we pulled up a trap, and there were these blue crabs in the trap. And that was in 2012, and they were giant. Ray Grizzle from UNH has said that he's seen them even earlier than that. And I have no doubt that's true. So again, it's hard to know where we're starting from, right? Are we starting from just a few, or are we starting with like an explosion of crabs? Kelsey Mayer, who's a PhD student at UNH, and I've worked with her a little bit. She's fantastic. She's doing a green crab project at UNH, and then she started catching blue crabs. And in 2022, she caught a mating pair. So she caught a male and a female crab doing their thing, right? And she documented it. She and her colleagues published that paper last year. So we have evidence. We have some pieces that we're linking together. And so it's exciting as a scientist. It's super cool, but it's also a little bit alarming and a little bit disconcerting because we don't know what that means in the future. Chris, Peter, and his group have been trapping for blue crabs the last year or two. 2022, Chris, is that right? I think. Yeah. Years. Yep. So students, interns, we have a research fellow that Chris and I are sort of co-mentoring Davidson Fellow, and she's been doing some blue crab surveys, trying to look at that interaction of blue crabs and lobsters in Great Bay. So Great Bay's got quite a bit of stuff that's happening, and I just brought some traps down for Chris, so we're gonna try to continue this for 2024 as well. Okay. Let me give you the backstory for the Wells blue crab story, because it's kind of interesting. So here's our two estuaries. And here's the backstory. I was walking through the marsh in 2019 in October, and I stepped on a crab just right in the marsh, and it like crunched. And I looked down and it was blue. And I said, that's not a green crab. That's not any crab I've ever seen. So that's what we're calling our first specimen, and it was dead. So we don't know if it got washed in from somewhere or if it was living there, but nonetheless, it was sort of like, wow, there's something going on here. Then in 2020, we started trapping, and we were catching live blue crabs in our traps. So, and we caught blue crabs in both marshes, the Little River and the Webb Hannock. So we decided to put together like a monitoring plan, and this is what we're collaborating with Great Bay, to again, try to provide the evidence of that expansion, describe the changes in southern Maine salt marshes and how those crabs are utilizing the salt marsh. So that's where we're finding them. We're finding the blue crabs in these pools way up on the marsh, right? Here's the upland edge of that marsh. That's the forest. And we're finding blue crabs like right up in there. So it's blows our mind how far away from the ocean we're actually finding them. And do they survive? Do they survive winters? And are they here to stay? And so we're trying to use our capacity and our techniques and sort of transfer that to Great Bay so we can be sort of comparing apples to apples. And the other thing we're doing, besides the trapping surveys, is we're doing plankton surveys. So we stick a net, like a giant, looks like a giant coffee filter in the water 4 times a month from our Webb Hannock inlet, and we're looking for larvae. We're really looking for fish larvae and any invertebrates like any kind of crab or anything else, but we are trying to pull out blue crab larvae. It's difficult because they all look the same. And it's like a needle in a haystack, but we have found them. So our trapping study, again, just to take you through a few details, this is like a typical feature where we find blue crabs. The marsh pool, maybe the size of this particular marsh pool, like maybe like 3 kiddie pools size, right? Not very big, and it's not deep at all. And so we've got traps in these locations, traps in these locations. Here's how many we fished. We're trying to like up our ante every year and see if we can do it. We collect temperature data and things like that. And here's our result. These are actually right up to date. So going to last year. And the first thing, when we worked up this data, I keep looking at these numbers here, this y-axis on this graph, because it goes from 0 to 300. And at first I thought, I think that's a mistake. You mean like 30? No, 300. So in 2023, we caught over 250 blue crabs, just with 12 traps in like 10 different salt marsh pools. So that, to us, that just blew us away. Because the subsequent years, we were catching low numbers. But comparatively, they're not that low, right? So we're thinking, what is going on with 2023? We're not changing anything. We're doing the same technique, same traps, same bait, same people. Okay, so there's literally nothing changing in how we're doing it. Then we kind of broke it down a little bit, and we looked at of that catch, if we could break it down by males, females, juvenile males, juvenile females. Because when we find juveniles, we have an idea that maybe those crabs are growing there, maybe they were born there. because there's no evidence to suggest that juvenile crabs can walk from Cape Cod into Wells, Maine. All right, it's a pretty far-fetched idea. Although as a scientist, I have to say it's possible, but very, very unlikely, right? So they're taking up refuge in these pools, and we're thinking, how are they surviving in these pools? And are they surviving in the winter? Because these pools get really cold. In fact, we have some data to show you. So, one of our research questions is, how cold does a marsh pool get? And so we just stuck some temperature loggers, tied them on a brick, threw the brick in the pond, walked away. Hope when we came back in April that we'd find them, and some of them we did, some were not there. Ice is a really bad thing for bricks. It will throw them out of the marsh and out of the pool. But we did get some cool data, and so this red line, these red lines here are the temperature of that pool from a little temperature logger. And the black line is temperature data from one of our primary, like NOAA long-term monitoring stations, similar to what Great Bay has. And you can see that water gets really warm in the summer, 30 degrees, that's really comfortable for a blue crab. They love that. So if I put that blue crab right on that heater right there, no problem, right? So, but then in the winter, you can see, the inlet, right, is getting down to about 0 degrees. But this particular marsh pool, what do you notice about these temperatures? As a New Englander, I'm gonna say those are pretty warm, right? Those are really warm temperatures. And this was 2022 to 2023, which is not a very cold winter. We had like one Arctic blast, and that was it. I think that's what happened, where we lost some data here too. So the point is that we are probably seeing blue crabs not having ill effects from those temperatures, because they're just not cold enough for long enough. And that's our running hypothesis. We haven't really fully tested that. We need to do lab studies and have more years of data to be able to say that definitively. But can a blue crab survive the winter in a Wells salt marsh? Yeah, it can, because we tagged this blue crab the year before. It was 148 millimeter male, so fairly good sized male. We tagged him. This is an acoustic transmitter, so it projects a sound underwater, and you can stick like a hydrophone and you can know where it is, right? It's kind of like when you drive through the Easy Pass at the Hampton Toll, it registers your car. It knows what time and what day that you drove through there. This crab stayed, we went back, put the trap in April, and this is the first crab we caught last April. So, and then we checked all our hydrophones, and they were pinging all winter. So this crab never left, which is super cool. We wrote a paper about it. Only paper I've ever written that has one sample, but it is what it is. It's actually pretty cool finding. So yes, they can overwinter. They are capable of doing that, but the temperatures were not that cold. We did another one of these tagging studies in 2022. That was the year that we tagged that crab I just showed you. We put these tags on. The one nice thing about the web-handed estuary is it's not very big, so we can cover the whole thing with those listening devices. And we did exactly that. So we put these hydrophones out at all these places, including the ocean. And then we tagged like a dozen blue crabs, and we let them go. And then we just watched them all summer long. And I'm not going to show you all of them. This is just one example. This is a female. She was 106 millimeters. From the time we tagged her, this is her track that she made. She passed 10 receivers. We had over 8,000 detections, and she was roaming around for 37 days. And this is a very common pattern you see in other places further south, right? Where these crabs, especially the females, leave the marshes in the fall And, so this was like a fall movement. And they'll go out and they're gone. They're just gone. So they're either reproducing or carrying their eggs out to sea, and then they will or won't come back. So, the biggest thing we were so excited about is this, our waves here are huge. And so we thought for sure we were gonna lose that receiver. We put it in an old lobster trap and buried it, and it still survived. So, through like a couple of really major storms. Yeah, question, yeah. What's that?
Your transmitters go from one.
No, they're only good for about 9 or 10 months. Yeah. So plankton surveys, or more specifically, zooplankton surveys. So we're doing these surveys. We started them in 2016, specifically for crab larvae. And when we do our tows, we have people who we trained to go back to the lab. It's a very thankless job. Pull all our samples out, categorize them, and then identify them. And it's not easy to do because this megalopa, this like post-larval blue crab or crab plankton, if I put a green crab one next to it and a Jonah crab one next to that one, they all look the same. So there's very subtle differences between them. This is a blue crab megalopa, and you can tell because it's got these two little, one of the ways you tell are these two little spines right here by the abdomen. So we have gone through that data. We had some students helping on this project. And this is my favorite slide. I'm totally biased, but the number of megalopi from 2016 to present, and we're still working on this one, but look at 2019. 2019, we had an unbelievable number of crab megalopi come into our estuary. Obviously, that's not all of them because we're not sampling all the time, but we had a huge number. We had 48 since 2016, but in 2019 alone, we had almost 20. And guess what happened in 2020 and 2021? We started seeing blue crabs. So is that a coincidence? Are they related at all? We don't know. But it certainly points to some suggestion that there might be a connection there. So it's really important to have this other piece because that really helps you discern and interpret what's going on with the adults, right? And then I just got a few more slides left, and I'd love to answer questions. Community science is really important, and none of this would happen without the community science that we're doing, Great Bay is doing. This is a pilot program we did 2 years ago in Casco Bay. So we were interested in Casco Bay. It's in right near Portland, if you're not familiar with it. It's a pretty big system. They've been seeing blue crabs there. We thought we already had people in some of the islands doing monitoring of invasive species. So we gave them traps and bait and temperature loggers, and they did an amazing job. We even did some eDNA stuff. Guess what? We didn't catch one blue crab the entire year, not one. And we didn't get any larvae. We didn't even get evidence of DNA in the water, like blue crab signatures. So it was a complete failure, but these people were just as happy on day one as they were at the end. And so that's just a great driving force. And then right here in this backyard here of Great Bay, with Chris and Helen, our Davidson Fellow, and with folks from UNH, we've got these trapping sort of locations. So think places like Adams Point and Fox Point and is that Oyster River or Pacheco or something? I'm not sure. And Great Bay, and like we're over here, right? Is this where we are?
No.
This way. Okay. So, and that's P's right there for reference. So again, Chris and I had already had a meeting to figure out like where we're gonna strategically locate traps. to try to target lobsters and blue crabs and see if there's some overlap there. Because again, it's nice to know where those two species may be interacting. So, and then just to bring it to another level, Chris is leading, sorry, Chris, I'm gonna put you on the spot, but Chris Peter is leading this New Hampshire Sea Grant project that we got awarded this year. And so super exciting. We're working with some folks from UNH and some folks from Manomet, which is in Brunswick, Maine. They're doing a lot of crowdsourcing. So how people can report blue crab sightings online and have all that data collated together. And we're helping out with that a little bit. So this is a project that sort of mirrors a lot of what we're already doing, but it's gonna sort of take it to another level. We're also gonna start examining what we think these blue crabs are eating. You know, what kind of diets do they have? What kind of, is there a difference between what they're eating here and what they're eating in a place like Wells, right? Are they operating in the same way? So really important stuff. Again, this wouldn't be interesting at all if we were in Virginia or Maryland or even New Jersey. But it's super interesting here because it's something that no one has ever documented. And then, you know, none of this ever would happen without volunteers and students and citizen scientists and people like yourselves who are interested in learning about this. And I think that's really, for me, a very motivating factor. This guy right here, Gordon, he's been our volunteer for 4 years. He just does blue crab stuff. He doesn't even want to do anything else. So he comes in twice a week, helps with trapping. He's a pro. He knows how to wrangle blue crabs better than anybody else that I know. And because he does it every single week. So we have just some amazing people, just like we have it here at Great Bay. We have this network that we've created. So Wells is kind of leading this, but we have people from Great Bay and Manomet. And I think we're creating this network called the Blue Crab Network, which is mostly Northern New England focused. So people that want to learn how to monitor crowdsourcing, how to collect the data properly. And we have, you know, Zoom calls. We're hosting a workshop in May, so we're going to get as many of those people together and just talk about how we can collaborate and pull together different strategies for streamlining what we're doing. And that is my last slide. So I want to say thank you to all these different funding places, New Hampshire Sea Grant, Maine Sea Grant, we have funding from them. Saltonstall Kennedy Grant, there's some overlap there, Wells, of course, Great Bay, and some other places. So thank you very much. I hope you learned something. This is my first ever blue crab talk. Because I have never had to work on blue crab biology so hard in my life. So we're all just trying to learn. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions. Anybody? Yes.
Is it legal to, if you catch one in the trap, to take it out and eat it?
Ooh. I'm gonna defer to Fish and Game on that one. I don't know what the rules are in New Hampshire. In Maine, you have to have a recreational lobster license in order to catch them. But I believe you can keep them.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing on the books. There's no minimum size or any of that. So I don't know what the rules are in New Hampshire. Sorry. Yeah.
You could like them.
What?
You would like them research.
Yeah.
Yeah. The one that you have in the back there,
Yeah.
is that from here or from?
I think that's from here, right?
Hey, do you know where that was from?
This is one of the males that we caught in Bunker Creek. That's for sure, we need the orange pocket that day.
And it will be going to the Sequence Science Center soon with the female that we also have in the basement. We swap the critters. And also, we can't really put it in our tank with the littler guys, so It'll have some more
Yeah.
space.
They don't play nice.
Yeah.
There's anything else. We put, you know gladiators, right? We put some green crabs in with a blue crab, and let's just say there wasn't much left of the green crab after a few hours. It was just literally tiny pieces of shell. Which is good. I was happy about that. So that's a good thing. Yeah,
Crabs that are native to Maine. Stone crab or watermelon.
rock crab, we have two native rock crab. Jonah crab and rock crab.
Well, they compete with.
Great question. I don't know. I have no idea. And that's the question, is how often are blue crabs interacting with these other species? You know, I mean, there are reports from lobster harvesters who have found blue crabs in their commercial traps. There's a lot of reports up in mid-coast Maine, so places like Friendship and Damariscotta, they're catching egg-bearing blue crabs in commercial lobster traps, not regularly. So the question is, what's going on the bottom of the ocean? You know, I think it's a much different situation in the estuary, where the estuary are, you know, Great Bay and wells are just inundated with blue crabs. I mean, they're everywhere. So they're most likely to come in contact with blue crabs. I'm not sure how often they would come in contact with a lobster, or in Great Bay, I would say probably more likely to have interactions with lobster, because we have quite a few lobsters in Great Bay. So, which is very unusual for an estuary. Lobsters don't usually do well in estuaries. They can't handle the ups and downs of life, right? So they're pretty wimpy, actually. Challenge.
Green crab population, down in Chesapeake, in areas where the blue crab population is high.
Very low. That's a great question. So everybody hear that? So green crab populations in Chesapeake Bay are, from what I understand, not very high at all. They don't necessarily have a green crab issue there. It begs the question, right? Is that because blue crabs are keeping them in check? You know, predation pressure? Or is it, the one argument I heard was, well, blue crabs were already established before green crabs invaded, right? Because green crabs invaded in over 200 years ago, and their point of entry, I think, was around New Jersey. So did they even go south? I don't know. I'm not really sure, but it's a really interesting question. I got to participate in a green crab workshop in Washington State back in February, and the green crabs are now out on the West Coast. And they're really worried about the impacts to their biggest crab fishery, which is Dungeness crab. And they're just trying to figure it all out. And it just sounds reminiscent to what we're trying to do with blue crab. We're just trying to sort it out, because we just don't know the magnitude, if it's gonna be all negative, or if it's gonna be some positive things that come out of this, right? We just don't know.
Go circling back to the Mid-Atlantic states where there was that dramatic drop off in catch.
Yeah,
I might think that the reason for that is the water is really warming there also, and so they're migrating north. We're getting those catch.
Yeah.
But then you tell me that in South America, they're all over South America, at least on the east coast of South America, where the water would be warm. And they're not leaving there. So is there a hypothesis as to why, not migration, but why if the crabs are happy in warm water in South America, they should be happy in warm water in the Mid-Atlantic states. So they're not necessarily migrating. So what is the other alternative theory as to why you're getting such a dramatic decrease? And are there any thoughts about getting blue crabs listed on some kind of watchful list, watch out list?
I have no idea. What I think is there's a disease issue. Disease might be the missing link, right? So I know a blue crab, a crustacean pathologist, who works at VIMS, Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And he studies a parasitic disease called, Hermidinium, I think it's called, and it infects blue crabs. And they got it really bad in Chesapeake Bay at one point, and it just stifled the population. It's almost akin to, you remember the lobster collapse in Long Island Sound in the late nineties? That it's still unknown what caused that, but a lot of it was warm water and shell disease, right? And the shell disease just knocked those lobsters right down and made them susceptible to other things. That's the thing about disease. It's not necessarily the disease itself. It makes them susceptible to other things. So now they're more sensitive to, let's say, warming water, or they can't compete like they used to. But I don't know, I don't have a definitive answer for you because I'm not a blue crab ecologist. Oh, but I'm gonna look into that because I think that is an interesting question. Right? And, but I do think disease has been a big part of, the blue crab problems in the Mid-Atlantic. Overfishing, I'm not sure. I don't know how intensely fished it is. But yeah, I can look into that for you. Yeah. Yes.
I was just thinking that Chesapeake must have a huge amount of academic interest and economic impact, and must be a lot of volume of scientific data down there. Do you consider this kind of a separate species up here, or a bloom of a different cause, compared to what you've been doing all along?
So are you asking if it's a different blue crab species here?
Not necessarily species, but the way you look at it.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're trying to reinvent the wheel to a certain extent. When you're saying what are they eating, what are their temperature tolerance, you know, what do they compete with? Those are probably things that are pretty well established, and then coastal, easy.
You sound like somebody who just reviewed our grant. That was a critique we got was, why are you interested in the same things that everybody else already knows? The answer is, no, the answer, it's a fair question because this is a completely different system. Number one, the abiotic factors, temperature, and, you know, even like photo period, things like that, they're very different here than they are in the Mid-Atlantic, right? So you almost have to establish some baseline data to say, are they doing blue crab things the way blue crab should do things here and in Maine and, you know, coastal New Hampshire? We don't know yet. I mean, I think they are, but we're not sure. And when we have this workshop in May, we're having a academic expert from VIMS who's gonna be here like for a few days. So we're gonna pick his brain and ask him every question we can. Because he's super excited and he thinks that blue crabs may be operating differently. There's also there's people interested in, are the diseases in the Mid-Atlantic that blue crabs have, are they being carried up here? Right, so there's a virus, a marine virus that blue crabs, that's unique to blue crabs. The question is, do blue crabs here have it? Right, so Chris and I think, have a lot of opportunity to like screen these animals and, you know, get some samples and give them to people and let them answer those questions. Because we just don't know, that's how new it is. The only other thing I want to say was, when you dig into the literature, you know, again, blue crabs have been here for a long time. They just pop their heads up every so often. You know, and the problem is, or not the problem, the difference now is the frequency at which we're seeing them is much higher. I mean, to be able to walk through our marsh and literally, you know, doing a survey of vegetation, and I'm seeing a pool that's about with this much water where blue crab this big. And I'm not even trying to find them, right? So they're.
You don't think those were falling out boats or anything like that previous?
What's that?
So 100 years ago, when a ship goes across the seaboard, they're not dropping out blue crabs here and there.
I mean, can they go through ballast water? Maybe. But they're not that, you know, the fact that their historic range is Cape Cod. They're probably either moving up past Cape Cod or,
Oh, I think they are now. I agree,
Yeah.
absolutely. I'm just wondering about those here and there sightings of them.
I mean, that's how green crab got to Washington State. They were imported with a seafood delivery, bait bags. And they were baby blue crab, green crabs in the bait bags. And they were put out in the water and that was that. So it doesn't take much, you know, to do that. But,
I answer that?
yeah,
Answer a little bit too?
Yeah.
So the organism we know a lot about, when I say we, I mean not Jason and I, he's nervous that blue crab developers. But people in Chesapeake know about blue crab, specific environment. So if we were to transplant Chris, myself, to Alaska, we'd behave quite differently too. So, and how do those behavior changes translate to impacts to the environment, to other organisms? That's what we're interested in, that's the question to ask. And another like parallel organisms, fiddler crabs are moving up at kind of the same rate of the coast because of warm temperatures, and they're much larger. Our colleague that Kate's referring to at BIM, he's studying them, and they're way bigger. Like, yeah, it's colder, you think they'd be smaller, but they just have a lot less competition. So we're seeing these behavioral changes of these species, and they also, like, with sea level rise, we've seen that when the marsh gets more flooded, they burrow more, and then they uproot more vegetation. So there's all these things that interact with behavior that we're doing.
yeah, and actually, I hate going back to green crabs again, but green crab invasion in places like Iceland and Nova Scotia and even here, there are behavioral differences and there's potentially genetic differences. But that has taken a long time, right? Again, the amount of time that they've been here is, and it's not really fair to compare green crabs to blue crabs, because they're very different in how they operate, at least from my perspective. So. Yes.
Yeah, I talked to some Watson last year in the bay, and all the rain we had to run off onto the harbor one day.
Yes.
If you get, you know, get the well, in offshore, seems to real well. Any correlation you think with all the salinity drop and the silt and all that?
Huge correlation. Yeah, so again, lobsters don't do well when you have a huge runoff event, right? They're not able to physiologically change how they adapt to that. Horseshoe crabs, no problem. You can throw a fire hose at them and they just don't care, right? Same thing with green crabs. They are really hard. This is why they've been so successful in estuaries. And blue crabs too are very adaptable. Lobsters are not an estuary organism, which is what to me makes it so cool. And you have a lot of them in here, but every so often when you have those episodic large rain events, runoff events, the lobsters will probably either do two things. They'll either three things. They'll either try to move out of the estuary, but as you know, Great Bay, you gotta go quite a ways, right? It's like 20 kilometers or something, like 15, 20 kilometers just to get down to the lower part of the Piscataqua. So they might try to do that. They might try to go to deeper water, right, where you have less of a salinity issue, or they'll just die. And a lot of lobstermen saw a lot of mortality of lobsters in the tracks this past year. And I think in 2013, where we had like one of those 100-year rainstorms, and lobsters were coming up dead carcasses in all the traps. So that's a whole other issue. I would argue that's a climate-driven issue also, because we're not supposed to have those episodic events so frequently. We're having them way frequently. And so if you're a lobster and you never evolved to live in an estuary, this is not gonna go well. But historically, the lobster population has been pretty good here. Yeah.
Is there any correlation between these processes in the environment? I understand there's a temperature and whatnot. But is there any differences between actual processes that could affect much the same.
I would use shell disease as my example, because I'm really familiar with that, right? You know, the hot marks that the lobsters get, right? So it's not necessarily lethal, right? It can be lethal, but it's usually not. The question that with the colleagues I've done work on with lobster shell disease is not what's the shell disease doing in the lobster, it's why did the lobster get it in the first place? Right, what brought on the disease? So there's something in the environment that's stressful to that animal. Right, and so it's sort of like, what is that? And we think for lobster, it's temperature. You know, they're very sensitive to warm temperature. So you stress them out. It's sort of like, you know, somebody like, you stay up late, you pull an all-nighter to take, you know, an exam, right, or finish your term paper, and you finish it, but then you get sick because you made yourself susceptible. And so it's the same thing with, I think, any marine animal in this context, it's susceptibility, and because most waters are warming, especially in Maine, Gulf of Maine, and it creates an unpredictable, stressful, a set of stressors that never existed. Right? And then they manifest as disease, or the animal moves away. With lobsters, and you know, this would be a lobster song. Lobsters are really good at moving, so they'll just move away. And that's what we're seeing, but they can't necessarily move away when they're 20-something kilometers away from the ocean. That's a lot, it takes a little bit of time to do that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think I always try to think of it as, it's not to look at the cause and not the implication. If that makes any sense. Yes.
You mentioned, I think it's in the fall, the females migrate from the estuary out into the open ocean to pasture in. Do the males migrate also, or do they just hang out in the estuary waiting for the females to come back?
Yeah, so that crab that we tagged as a male, that male stayed. Females, we tend to move, I think the mature females tend to move out, and to a large extent, the males do also. I don't know if how that plays out in their native range, like the Mid-Atlantic. The cool thing is, they go out into pretty deep water. If the females, they'll hatch their eggs, those larvae will hang out in the open ocean for months. And then those larvae will come back, and how they find the estuary and get up into those shallow reaches is really cool. They use something called selective tidal stream transport. So the megalopi that I showed you, they're finest, you know, this big, size of your thumbnail, they're super sensitive to pressure. They'll stay on the bottom during outflow, like at tide, and then they'll during the flood tide, they'll come up into the water. And basically they'll surf the tide right up in the estuary. So blue crabs are like true estuarine animals. That's why I don't think they have a problem staying near Great Bay, except if we have like prolonged cold temperatures. And I think it's a different story. So that's to me the bottom line is if temperature keeps warming, I think we're gonna have fiddler crabs and blue crabs, we're gonna have new species hanging around that were never really intended here. Yeah, then you have to ask the question, what do we do? Manage it? You know, I always say for green crabs, at this point, they're, for my opinion, they're a naturalized species at this point. So we have to manage them. You know, getting rid of them is impossible, so. But I don't know if you got new crabs. Fishery makes sense, but we're really good at fishing things down. So, I don't know, I think time will tell.
Do the green crabs, I mean, the blue crabs only mate once for females? On our river. I
Yes,
think they just,
yeah,
they only have one set of eggs and that's it. I don't know what happens to them after.
after they
They're only like,
hatch their eggs.
yeah,
I think they can have multiple clutches of
Okay.
eggs. Yeah,
okay,
so they'll molt, and they typically will mate after the female has molted. Yeah.
That kind of holds true for most crabs and lobsters. Yeah. Yeah. One of the things we did in Wells was we bought it's a blue crab textbook. It was put out by Maryland Seafood, it's about this thick, like 600 pages. And we are reading that. We're trying to, so it's got all that stuff. It's pretty interesting. So, but the workshop we're hosting is gonna be a way for us scientists and researchers to actually up our game and figure out the missing, figure out those questions. So I can take one more question. And then unfortunately I have to flip. Yes.
Is there any way to study whether hundreds of thousands of years ago, blue crabs were numerous in this area?
Yes, not, maybe. Ooh, that's a tough, so biogeography, right?
Yeah, through anthropological studies.
Yeah.
Of, Native Americans, for example.
So maybe you might be able to tap into some local ecological knowledge, indigenous knowledge, but I really don't know. Because like 10,000 years ago, we had a sheet of ice, right? And lobsters were actually further south. So if I had to guess, I would say that blue crabs were even further south and probably were not up here. That's just my like unofficial guess,
Right.
you know, but you know, the problem is there's no, you can't look at fossils with crustaceans. You know, those skeletons, exoskeletons they just crumble. There's not really good evidence for it. Could you look at like cores? Maybe Chris knows, I don't know, like, can you core a marsh and look for evidence of past species? I don't know.
Like DNA, but in the core.
Yeah, DNA or something, I mean, it's, yeah, most of those case studies that we have are for like mammals. Things that have bones, things that have, you know, pretty good shelf lives. So crustaceans don't. In fact, they're impossible, you can't even age them because they don't have any hard parts on them. They don't have bone structure. So like fish do, you know, mammals. So I don't know the answer to that, but if I had to guess, I would say during that ice age era, everything was pushed further down. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah.